Trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed and confused with unhelpful information and advice? This podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax. I'm your host, Hannah Pern, a fertility acupuncturist and passionate advocate for better fertility education and support. Our aim is to empower you with information to support your fertility journey and provide a community for connection with people who get where you're at. If you'd like to join us or work with us in clinic in London or across the UK, all the information is in the show notes at the end. This podcast is sponsored by Invivo Healthcare, the human microbiome company restoring human health and ecology with seamlessly connected testing, supplements and education. The Invivo team of scientists and practitioners work alongside healthcare practitioners to expand their expertise. As pioneers in testing, Invivo Ecologics range delivers a unique insight into the gut, vagina, oral and urinary microbiomes with unparalleled detail and accuracy. Their supplements are crafted using live commensal cultures and selected botanicals and designed with specific microbes in mind for a truly targeted approach. Invivo is a go-to in my clinic for microbiome testing and supplementation. For more information, visit invivohealthcare.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Don't Tell Me to Relax. I am joined by Carly Garret and we are going to be talking all about pregnancy testing and the impact of negative pregnancy tests, because there was a post in our community the other day where someone had just done a pregnancy test and it was negative, and she was obviously very upset and despairing and just kind of put a shout out for help and support in the community. And I thought, yeah, this is a really important one to discuss and chat about, because obviously if you're trying to conceive, there are often times when you do pregnancy tests and it's negative, and that can trigger a lot of despair and feelings of hopelessness and lots of different things. So I'm joined by Carly, who is a fertility coach, to discuss this, because who is better to talk about this kind of situation? So Carly, before we get into all of that, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your work?
Yes, hello. My name is Carly Garret, and as you said, I am a fertility coach and the fertility coach within the wonderful Hannah Pern team. So I work online, and I am also a fertility reflexologist. So I work in London, in southwest London, Wimbledon, and at home in Surrey.
So Carly, tell us about testing, and shall we start off with the different circumstances for I've messed that up. Carly, let's start with what happens when you do a negative test, or what can happen for people when they've done that test and it's negative.
Yeah, so obviously we're starting, if we think about, without even thinking kind of mind-wise, thinking physically with our body, we've got such a huge drop in our hormones, and that really takes its toll, as you know, and for some more than others. So first of all, you're up against your body. If you have bad PMS, if you have terrible period pains, that is really going to take its toll in the first place, and that's really going to make a difference to your mental state and where you're coming to this negative test at. And then we've got the emotions that come on top of that. So you get this, you've been trying for a certain amount of time, and I think here we're generally talking about women that have been trying for longer, and that's obviously different for everybody. There are some women that when we try, decide that the time's right to start trying, we're ready and we're invested, and so we want to be pregnant right now. So in those first early months it can be a bit softer, but then after that it can really take its toll, and you will just have that kind of cascade of emotions that you can get. So you can be feeling angry, you can be feeling sad, you can be feeling guilty, you can be blaming yourself because you didn't do something as perfectly as you wanted to at a certain time in your cycle, or you didn't have enough sex, or you shouldn't have eaten something, and that can really take its toll. And all of these emotions layer on top of each other, and it can be a huge punch in the gut, which is horrible, really, really horrible. And when that happens month after month, year after year, and you're feeling more and more left behind, and you're seeing that people are moving kind of forward with their families, that can be really, really difficult and really take its toll.
Yes, and I also guess that a lot of the time for people, I guess, like thinking about testing, and let's just sort of discuss it in the different scenarios where people might be testing. So if you've been trying to conceive naturally, I'm assuming that you're taking a test because your period hasn't started when you would have expected it to start. And therefore, a lot of the time, you might be a few days late, and that makes you think, okay, maybe I'm going to be pregnant. I'm going to take a test now. So I guess what you've also got to add into that is that rise of hope, because for lots of people, their period starts, and so they don't need to test if you're trying naturally, because your period is the indicator that you haven't been successful on that cycle. But if you're taking a test, it's probably because you might have an inkling that you are pregnant and you want confirmation of it. So, it's that you've had that kind of like dangle of hope in front of you that something might have happened this month, and therefore to then have the kind of hope with the test and then the kind of crushing blow of it being negative, it's kind of like exacerbates all those feelings that you've just discussed.
Absolutely, because we read into our bodies, and if something is different, doesn't really matter what it is, but if something feels different from the cycle before, then that can lead you to believe that you're pregnant. If you get sore breasts and you didn't get sore breasts before, or vice versa, and you're right, it is that stage that you've got to, where you're literally counting down the days in that 2-week wait to when your period will be due. And if you reach that, then that is when you are more full of hope, and that can be shattering.
And I guess in an IVF cycle, I mean, the IVF cycle, you've done all that treatment, you've gone through all the procedures. This is if you're doing a fresh cycle, not a frozen cycle. And then you get to that point where you've been waiting for that day. It's because it's marked on, what day they want you to test, because that clinic will tell you. So you've got that date in mind. And then to sort of have to wake up in the morning and go through that test with all of that you've been through, it's kind of like exacerbates it even more.
Absolutely, and it's as you say, and I'm sure you're exactly the same as me, that we know when our clients are testing generally, and so it is that before I go to bed of a night time, thinking about them, and that's what you're going to bed thinking, when I wake up in the morning, my life can possibly be different, can possibly change, and that you're not being able to sleep properly, waking up early, but is it too early to do your first wee of the day? And it's just all of that anticipation, all of that waiting for that specific day that as you say, if you're going through IVF, and generally naturally as well, that you have this date in your mind, and you're just counting down the days, and as you're getting closer and closer to it, it gets harder.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've worked with people in clinic who stop testing because they find it so triggering, like it brings back such difficult memories of painful experiences. So I have I've worked with people who have either, if they're trying naturally, they have they've stopped testing altogether, and they just wait to see whether their period comes or not, and they will literally wait it out. I've also had patients that I've worked with who have gone into the clinic to get a blood test rather than do a pregnancy test at home, because they've found that is like a different scenario, a different situation to find out that information that feels easier and better than kind of going through the process at home. So it's interesting, isn't it, how some people actually cannot do tests anymore because they're so traumatized by doing so many of them, and then them being negative and the consequences of that.
That's right, and it's just that it's that the trigger of redoing of constantly doing tests, and like you say, that doing it in a different way. And if we think now of how things have changed so much post-COVID, and I remember, you know, having so many clients pre-COVID that would go and have the blood test and then go into the office and be expected to go back to work, and to wait for this telephone call to come through whilst they're sitting at their desk, and then try and kind of take it, and it's not any easier to take that call at home, but at least you are potentially in the privacy of your own home, and you can manage your emotions in that way.
Yeah. And what do we think about early testing? So if whether you're doing IVF or, well, let's separate them out, because they are a bit different, or they can be a bit different. So what about early testing, like when you're trying to conceive naturally? What do you think about whether people should or shouldn't do that?
I personally am not a big fan of early testing. My question would always be, what do you feel that you're trying to achieve by testing early? Because if you, and this is the same, you know, I do kind of see this as the same with trying naturally and trying with IVF. And obviously with IVF, it's different if it's a fresh cycle, if it's a frozen cycle, the time that you can test. But my view on it would be that if you have a negative test, then, and you've tested early, you're going to be crushed by it, you're going to be floored by it. If it's a natural, if you've gone through an IVF cycle. But what happens, what I see is, if you take that test early, is you've taken the test and then it's a kind of, oh, but it was early, so it could change. So you have that little bit of hope that reignites, and then, you know, it might be a few days early it could be 4 days early, it could be 5 days early. You've then got that continuation of testing because you don't believe the outcome, and that constant negative test again, unless it changes, obviously. But so I'm not a huge fan of that. And then on the flip side of that, if you do get a positive test, a positive result, then again, are you going to actually believe it? And you keep testing, and that anxiety that can come with that, you know, we see it within the Facebook group. I see it with my clients, of them sending me photographs of day on day of their test. Is it getting darker? If it's not getting darker, why is it not getting darker? And that anxiety, that extra anxiety, that neither way gives you the reassurance that you're hoping for. And so therefore I personally feel it's easier to sit in that uncertainty, which is hard. It's really, really hard. So I'm certainly not saying that it isn't, but with a little bit of hope, than that having an answer but don't trusting the answer, because whatever the answer is going to be, it could change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does completely, because it's just like you say, it's the uncertainty of testing before you are due to test that it does create so much more anxiety. But I completely empathize why people do it, because you're looking for information and you're looking for hope and you're looking for that line. So
Of
it's
course.
completely understandable. But
Yeah,
I
of
think,
course.
you know, on a rational level, I know when I've spoken to people I've been working with, they're like, on a rational level, I know this is not the right way of doing things, or, you know, I know this is going to create more anxiety. But the rational person kind of gets lost in this quite a lot of the time, and you just kind of looking for information and that kind of like that hope that you've been seeking. And so people do test early, and it's completely, you know, I get it.
Yeah, it's just such a difficult position to be in, and it's such a long
Yeah.
period of time. So my view we've talked about it before with the whole 2 week wait, and it is just that countdown of getting to test day. And so I completely understand why people test early, but it's just, unfortunately, whatever answer you get when you test early, I really don't believe that it gives you the reassurance that you think it will do, and it can open up another kind of gate to anxiety that wasn't there before.
Yeah. And so if you are testing and your test is sadly negative, in that moment, so I guess I'm thinking back to the person who wrote in the community, what can you possibly do? Is there, we like to fix things, don't we, as human beings? We like to say, if you do this, you do that, you'll feel better. And so I guess it's a bit of a stupid question, really, because there is not much that you can do. It is a really tragic, devastating situation. If you've tested, you've hoped that you're pregnant and you're not. But is there anything, from your perspective as a coach, that you could, discuss that could help ease that time or help somebody through that time?
I am, as you know, a big fan of planning. So I think that during early on in your cycle, preferably pre-ovulation, pre-transfer time, you should plan for this. And when I say plan for this, I don't mean that means you don't believe it's not going to work. I don't mean that means you're not hopeful. But I think that if you think about your needs for that time, because if you think about, if you do have heavy, painful periods, if you do really, really suffer from PMS, let's start there. What would your needs be? What will that potentially future you need in that moment? And so that might be, have a bottle of wine in your fridge. It might be, have the chocolate. It might be, make sure that you haven't got anything booked in your diary that you will need to be doing that you won't want to be doing. So that would be my first thing to do, to kind of plan for it. And as I say, it's not meaning that you don't believe it's not going to work. It's just having something there as a backup if it doesn't. And then it's about sitting with the feelings, I'm afraid, and listening to what you need. And every feeling that you will be feeling is perfectly natural, normal. It feels shit because it's really shit. It's really beyond shit, and it's not fair, and everything that comes with that, and everything that comes up from that. And it really can be very uprooting, because it can bring so many things to the surface, and you can just go into a spiral. So first of all, if we go back to that planning and have your kind of basic needs met, so even if it's a case of, if during your bleed you're just kind of craving comfort food, then make sure that you've got food there that you can feed yourself. You can feed and water yourself if that's, because that's what you need, because that's our basic needs. And then that gives you space to do what you want and do what you need. If you need to see a friend, if you want to be by yourself, if you want to curl up on the sofa and watch a movie, if you don't want to get out of bed all day, that's absolutely fine. You've just kind of got to sit with it. And if it stays for a little while, if those feelings, those emotions stay for a while, that's okay. And to know that's okay. And to try and quieten your internal voice. And so when all of well, you shouldn't have done that, I knew I should have done that, I knew I should have tried that, it would have been different, try and be kind to yourself and rein that in slightly, because that's really not helping you, and that's just going to make you spiral even further.
I love that, Carly. That's such a good helpful tip, isn't it? Because that's the kind of thing that it's a really practical thing to think about, is to think about the future you. Because obviously, as I think we talk about this a few times, when you're in the depths of that pain, it's difficult to meet your basic needs sometimes because you're so upset on every single level. And we're not saying that it's going to make it better. Well, it will make it a little bit better, but just on that practical level of having maybe taking the day off work, especially when if you're doing IVF and you've got that definitive test day, it's easier, isn't it, I think, to plan for taking the time off work, or making sure your in-laws aren't staying that weekend, or whatever it is that is going to practically sort of support you to be in that moment and those feelings. I think is a really, really helpful suggestion.
Yeah, and I think it's about making it. I think if we think about what's going to make it softer, as opposed to what's going
Yeah,
to make it better, nothing's going to make it
yeah,
better.
yeah,
Nothing's going to make it better. And you're right, just bringing in that softness and what you need,
yeah. And
and making it about
often,
you.
yes, making it about you, that is a really good one, really important one. What do you think? Often what we see is that when somebody has had a negative test, and we see this, I think we get lots of questions about this in the community, is that people often very quickly go looking for answers. So,
Hmm.
whether if it's a failed cycle of IVF, or a negative test from a natural cycle, it can really sort of propel people into, why has this happened? Like, what has happened? What can I do about it going forward? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes I feel that, going back to what you were saying about sitting for a bit in the moment to feel the
Hmm.
feelings. I understand, because I do this myself. I am a hand on heart. If something hits me, what I like to do is go into busy mode, so I
Yeah,
so I don't so I can override those feelings or those emotions. And I see that a lot in this situation, where people start. That's when the googling starts, or they
yeah.
book in a consultation with somebody else. None of which is I'm not recommending it, but it's just interesting to observe what do you do in that situation? Like, what is your response in that situation? And sort of making ourselves busy and finding answers sometimes it might not be the best way to get through that time.
That's right. And we know that with our brains, that when we are in the fight or flight state, or when we're overwhelmed, that the logical part of our brain can't function. It just doesn't, it just can't function properly. So we need to bring ourselves out of that emergency state, out of that overwhelm, and then we can start thinking more clearly. So like you're saying, the whole scattergun approach of, what am I going to do to fix this? What am I going to do to make this work next time? What is that missing piece of the puzzle? And like you say, falling down that Google rabbit hole of spending hours and hours. So if we can work on bringing something in that is going to calm your central nervous system. And I actually sent an email out about this to my mailing list at the weekend, about that doesn't have to be, when we talk about calming your nervous system, it doesn't have to be that you've got to meditate, or you've got to do yoga, or you've got to put your legs up against the wall. It could be that you bake, or you sing, or you play a bit of music, or you play a musical instrument, anything creative. And so I would urge you to think that way, and to do something to calm yourself, and then you can come at it in a more logical, um, proactive approach, I guess, because you're then able to think more clearly, and you're not out of that, because at that time everything's going to be so heightened, your body thinks it's in danger.
Mm.
So everything's, your heart's racing, everything, and you're feeling every emotion under the sun. um Probably a lot of self-blame going on, because that's usually what happens as women. That's generally what happens. And so if you can spend some time sitting with your emotions, doing something nice, go out and have a walk, just do something that soothes your soul, connecting in with your partner, because they're going to be feeling it as well. And then you can come at it that, okay, we need to make some changes. What are the next steps? Is it a case of, this is the second round at the same clinic, do we look at changing clinic? Do I now need to go to the GP and have some tests done? Do I need to get some advice somewhere? But otherwise, if you're coming at it at that moment, you'll wake up the next morning and you'll have 20 different appointments booked and 100 books from Amazon, and that again is going to be even more overwhelming.
Yes. And actually, next week on the podcast, we've done a little bit of a sort of first line checklist of things to think about when you're trying to conceive and it's not happening. So Katie and I have sort of gone through areas that you might want to think about, that, if you went to your GP, they would talk about, your blood tests and a transvaginal scan and a semen analysis. That would be the kind of medical first line step for investigations, which are great. What we've done is we've sort of added on to that. So as like holistic practitioners, like I know you would work in the same way as a reflexologist, what are the other areas that we would walk through and talk through and discuss with somebody who was really struggling to understand, like, why was this happening and why were they getting these negative tests? No, I'm not talking about IVF patients. It's a different situation, but if you're trying to conceive naturally, then that is what we're talking about next week. So that if this is resonating, you want more support, then I think that would be a good episode to point people to.
Yeah, that's great.
What about, because I know that in our community, people do reach out to each other, don't they, with messaging, for support and kind of, I guess, empathy, like an understanding of, this has happened to me too. Do you think that can be helpful?
I think it's really helpful. I think we see it all of the time, don't we, in the Facebook group, and I just think that is truly wonderful that somebody, the lady that put the post up about the negative tests, and others will come in, and they don't even need to, it's not about having an answer, is it? Or like you said earlier about fixing it. It's about, a lot of the time it's like, I really feel you here. I'm knee deep in it myself. I had a negative test yesterday, and I think there is a hell of a lot of comfort that can come from that, knowing that you're not alone in this, and that's where the Facebook communities and community in itself is really, really valuable.
Yeah, and you know what? When I work with people in clinic, and I imagine you feel the same. When we sit with people who've just tested, negative, and what I always amazes me is the resilience of people. That I see it time and time again, where it might take them a while, but people do, dust themselves down and start again. After they give themselves some time, really like look after themselves, and then if you're on a natural cycle, it's like your period finishes, and then you're moving towards that ovulation, and people kind of really are resilient in that they go again and on off. They sort of start on another new month of trying to conceive, and it's kind of like it's what has to happen to continue, is like that sort of drawing on your deep reserves of energy to get up and go again.
Yeah, absolutely. Resilience is absolutely incredible, and working with the cycle, and also it's really interesting because you would have also worked with women that are really looking forward to their bleed coming so that they can get on and start a new cycle, and that kind of mind shift in that one cycle from how it's been from the previous cycles, because they've been trying, desperate to be pregnant that month, whereas this time it will lead them into moving into an IVF cycle generally. And but you're right, that resilience and trying to embrace our hormones with that as well, because they play such a huge part of it. They play such a huge part, and it's still, you talk about it all the time, I talk about it all the time. The education isn't there. And I was speaking to somebody about it recently, plan things around ovulation as opposed to in your luteal phase, because you feel much better. And she's like, oh yeah, you're right, actually, I never put two and two together. And you're right, it's that kind of, it's just the it feels so cruel the way that our body works, that you get that negative test as your period's coming. And so you've got that crash of hormones, but then we have that estrogen, that wave of estrogen, that you're just kind of like, do you know what, I can do this again. Let's go again. Yeah. Right, I've got my dates in the diary. Let's do it again. And that's the cyclical nature of a woman, and that's how that's kind of what keeps us going, really, a lot of the time.
That's such a great chat to have with you, Carly. Can you, I know you've got a few things like support things happening this month, for people who are trying to conceive, who are looking for, extra support. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you've got on and where people can find out more?
Absolutely. So I've got 3 things coming up in January. So firstly, on Sunday, Sunday the 19th, I am hosting, I can't remember if it's my 3rd or my 4th fertility walk, and this time it's in Surrey. So I think I've got about 10 or 12 ladies that have put their names down. So we will kick off around 10 o'clock in Ripley in Surrey. So if that's something that you'd like to come along to, I can always give you the link, Hannah, to put in the show notes for that. You'll be more than welcome to come. I've had some very, very wonderful friendships come from my walk, so it's something that I love doing. Then on the 26th of January, I will be running my free Nurture Your Fertility Holistic Circle. So this is it's via Zoom. Get you to tuck yourself away in your bedroom for an hour, and we'll do some facial reflexology, some breath work, guided meditation, gentle release therapy, and really connect you into your body and the other ladies that will be on the call. And then on the 29th of January, it's our herbal tea and chat within the Facebook group. So again, that's a lovely bunch of ladies that come along, and it's just space for you to connect, come and offload about whatever's going on for you at that moment, come and tell us about your day or your week or your month, and just a really wonderful supportive space to be.
Lovely. So there are a few different options depending on location, time, accessibility. So there's something for everybody there, all of which are free events. So it's amazing that you offer that resource, Carly. So if you've listened to this and you're feeling like that would be helpful, all of the details will be at the end of the show. So as always, Carly, I think this has been our 3rd, or is it our 4th?
This is my 4th podcast. Oh, how exciting.
You and Kirsty might be the world record for returns to the podcast. It's because your episodes always do so well. That's why people want to hear more. So thank you, as always, for your time. I'll put all of Carly's details to work with Carly as well at the end of the show. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We hope you have found this helpful. If you'd like more on fertility education, please see our Teaching to Conceive free course linked at the end of the show. You'll also find the link to join our community. For more personalised fertility support, you can work with us one-to-one in clinic and online. You can book a discovery call to find out more.